And good day. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. California crazy. It's already here, folks. I'm both saddened and kind of a little hopeful with this first story about California crazy. In Sacramento, the Democrats and the progressives seem to think it's a good idea that we don't have the same penalties if you're buying, for sex, 16 and 17-year-olds. It's not the same penalty as a 15-year-old. And they fought for that. And their rationale seems to be, let me get this right, they're afraid that parents will use it against somebody because of an interracial marriage or because of an LGBTQ relationship. Now, if that's how we view morality in the law, you can always come up with some BS scenario that will invalidate doing what's right. Well, I'm hoping this is at least 90-10 issue, and I'm hoping it's higher than that. But there were a whole lot of Democrats up in Sacramento that did not want the same penalty for for buying prostitution, 16 and 17-year-olds. This is child trafficking. Sacramento seems to, and it's totally run by Democrats, that seems to be the norm. They're always looking for some way to take away safeties, protections. It's like, how can we protect the perpetrator, the bad guy? And how can we make the innocent? I get it, 16 and 17, if they're in prostitution, they may not be totally innocent, but they're not adults and they're not responsible for their actions. And anybody that's trying to buy them should have real penalties. So, utterly pisses me off. The Republicans had a fit, and a small number of the Democrats went, oh yeah, that does sound wrong. Most of them were like, oh no. We need to have as many, I don't know if you'd actually be a pedophile, but you'd at least be a scumbag. We need to protect the scumbags. And that seems to be what people like Anthony Weiner, ironic that he's in leadership, he's from San Francisco, and that's the man's real name, is always trying to protect the scumbag, the criminal, the one that is essentially abusing kids. Well, the Republicans went to the media. This is an easy one. Local news stations picked it up. We put a little pressure on. And what do you know? When you apply enough pressure to a Democrat, they suddenly realize what the right thing is. Now, the sad part is that they have to learn this. This is a no-brainer. But they've lost their minds because all they care about is protecting, well, not the victim, but protecting the criminal. Now, that's not the only things that happen in Sacramento. It is pretty regular that they line up, meaning the Democrats, on the wrong side of an issue. For instance, they're not for parental rights. I think it's 1550, AB 1550. They set up a situation, and it was passed into law, and Lord Newsom, scumbag that he is, he decided to sign it. And what it does is it enables, actually encourages, actually demands that schools hide whether a kid wants to use different pronouns, wants to identify as one of the pretend genders besides the one they were born with. Yes, we really did that. So now, by state law, schools and teachers are supposed to lie to parents. That's almost like communists, where the whole idea is to separate the kids from the parents. No, that couldn't be happening at the state level. No, it's really happening, folks. It is truly upsetting. Now, California, we have the most human trafficking of any state. Some of the places you look will tell you that there's as much human trafficking happening in California as the rest of the other 50 states combined. most of the places you look, you just see that it is significantly worse, and worse as a percentage of the population than most places. And human trafficking, it's a real issue. And it doesn't just happen to people that are snuck across the border. It happens to our vulnerable, meaning American citizens, as well as sneaking people across the border. Well, we got more of that in California. And yet we don't seem to be fixing it. Now, good news on that is FBI is now focused on human trafficking. It seemed to ignore that during the Biden administration and seems to be a priority. Now, have I seen as much from Kash Patel and Pam Bondi as I want? No. Release the Epstein list now. Release the Diddy party list now. As in, it should be happening. It should already be in everybody's mailbox or on the local news now. Don't wait. Nonetheless, the good news is Kash Patel just announced that they have arrested over 100 people. I think it's a little closer to 200 than 100. So that's a start of people that are buying, looking at child porn. Hallelujah. About time. Don't see, once those people are convicted in the court of law, I don't see any penalty as too great. Now, if they're U.S. citizens, we got to go through the court of law. Of course, that's a Republican position because the Democrats have now decided that no, you can sneak here illegally and you can be a criminal. And all of the constitutional rights, because it's convenient, need to apply to you. I don't think so. If we looked at what Barack Obama, and I really disliked Barack Obama, but I didn't hate him the same way they hate Trump. I just thought he was an incompetent socialist who talked real pretty and lied to me continually. At least Trump's real. Obama, he deported, and he was often joked about as the deporter-in-chief in liberal media, something like 10 million people. And magically, you didn't have to have a court case for each one of them. How is it that we suddenly have to have a court case? Now, we could go all the way back to Clinton. Why, Clinton deported millions of people. Something close to 10 million. I believe it was slightly more than Barack Obama. Didn't have to have a court case and a court hearing on every single one of them. Off they went. George Bush, same thing. They largely ignored the issue with Biden because he wasn't deporting anybody. Didn't matter if you were a criminal. I'm not sure that he was anything. I don't think he was awake. He was asleep at the wheel. So whoever was running the presidency during the Biden administration, they wanted every bit of border crossing, every illegal they could get in. And they knew that by and large, those people go to blue areas because they're sanctuary cities. There's more services, things like that. Well, the dirty little secret is, for some reason, we don't just count citizens and legal residents. I'd be okay with counting legal residents. We count everybody that happens to live in an area to divide up the Congress. So if there's more people in a liberal area, even if they're here illegally, even if they're criminals, if they get counted in the census, they count towards that dividing up of the pie because there's only 435 House of Representative members. So the more people you have in the area, the more votes or more representatives you have. California, if we got rid of our illegals, would have at least 5 less. I've heard some people say 10 less representatives. So I don't know what in actual numbers, I just don't remember on that. But it's crazy. But not the only way that California is crazy. California seems to hate anything traditional. They're either woke left or progressive left. I think those two are largely hand in hand. There's certainly the idea of like blue dog Democrats. They really don't exist. We have pretend blue dog Democrats like Jim Costa, who won't hardly give an interview, truly, I'm not accusing him of a crime, but I don't see him as a very honest man. And I'm embarrassed that, well, he's not technically my representative. If I lived just about a half a mile over, he'd be my representative. We need to do better. We need better than Chicken Jim Costa. Now, we do have the equivalent of a blue dog Democrat in some places in California. They're called Republicans. People like David Valadao, who's just barely over the line a Republican, but I suppose it's better that he's a Republican than a Democrat. So, maybe we can at least exert some control and get some sanity out of him. I don't know. I'll never forgive David Valadao for some of the things that he's done. And I actually walked for the man one time, I'm embarrassed to say. Had a conversation about conservatism, and then not long after that, he betrayed Trump and impeached Trump. So I see him as a backstabbing, no good, kind of worthless. Anyway, not only do progressives seem to not want anything that's traditional American, they think you're racist. They think that any conservative idea, it needs to be gotten rid of. It's like the whole concept of America needs to be gotten rid of. They see conservatives, or even just people that are patriotic, as bad people. Not good people with bad ideas, which is what I think of most of the left. They see them as bad people. Well, if they're actually bad people, then you can label them as Nazis, fascist. Yes, you can use the N-word on them and call them Nazis. I know there's another N-word. I'm not going there with that one, but I'm wide enough that I can get away with the Nazi word. I don't consider it appropriate to speak about people that way, because Hitler was one of the worst things to ever happen to our world in recorded modern history. Now, is it fair to say that there's some comparisons? Yes, there's some tendencies, and you can look at the Nationalist Socialist Party, known as the Nazis, and go, yeah, they were for government control. You technically still owned your business, but they told you what to do, what to produce, how to do it. But they were all about more control. Does that mean that because I see the left as always wanting more control and more government control as Nazis? No, but they have some things in common. So that got me to thinking about what are the foundations of our freedom? And I kind of divided it. I did some research and I kind of thought about it, and I'm like, okay, well, one of the things is our inalienable rights, meaning rights you can't take away, rights that can't be transferred to somebody else. So property could be transferred to somebody else. So that would be something that's alienable. Unalienable means it sticks with you. If you're born a U.S. citizen, you've got those types of rights. So there's one of the foundations of the Constitution. And then right there at the start, it talks about this crazy idea of self-evident truths. Now, we could say, well, that means truths that are obvious. Yet, if I talk to my friends on the left, they would not agree with me as to what is obvious. Another way to think of that is, if they're obvious, they'd be something like common sense. Well, back when the Constitution was written, I think there was a lot more commonality, that culture was defined by the Christian church. Whether you like that or not, and as much as the left wants to say, oh, yeah, some of our founding fathers were deists. If you read anything by Franklin, he quotes the Bible continually. And he's the main one that they go, he's a deist. If you look at what happened during the Constitutional Convention, and they were at a loggerhead. They were there in the summer. It was hot. They were miserable, and they were not going anywhere. And Ben Franklin was the one that suggested, well, we need to hire a pastor and come in and pray for us, because we need the hand of God. The deist asked for the hand of God and prayer to bring us together, to unify us, to finish this document, which I believe was brilliant. Was it implemented brilliantly? No. It was not fully implemented. We did not see full rights for anybody of a darker skin shade than me. Thank God we fixed that, but we fought a civil war for that. We didn't give the women the right to vote. Not initially, but the idea, the foundations of freedom, the principles were set down there. And the third thing that kind of makes this a successful country would be the free market economics. So instead of having a top-down system, which might be a monarchy, it might be what Hitler did with fascism, it might be what Mussolini did with fascism, it might be a king, it might be a communist country where whether it's Putin or Xi in China, where the state decides everything. Well, it's pretty hard to have the state decide everything in some ways and still have a free market economy, because people begin to crave the ability to make the choices that are right for their lives. I don't believe that government can do that efficiently. I think it's not possible. And in California, they've abandoned this idea that the people know better. There seems to be a whole lot of, well, we know better and we will simply tell them what to do. You know, the idea of no cash bail, meaning somebody's a dangerous criminal and we had a bail system so that they couldn't just get out. They had to put some money down to guarantee that they were going to come back. And it largely worked. The argument was, well, some poor people can't handle it. Well, they can't afford it. So that made the justice system not quite level. Well, the truly rich, sadly, can afford better lawyers and often get away with things. The middle class and the lower, poorer people, because I don't want to call them lower class, I want to call them people with less money, because I know a lot of poor people that have a whole lot of class. They just economically, they're not doing well. They didn't have that option. You know, they'd get the state lawyer, the guaranteed one in the Constitution. Excuse me, federal lawyer if it's a federal case. But we have a state constitution. They get a state lawyer for that also. And so with that, justice wasn't quite level. It's never going to be quite level. I want to point out, in communist countries, there seems to be rich people. I know that seems wrong. It's all supposed to be for the people, right? But there's rich people. In socialist countries, there seems to still be rich people. There seems to be a ruling elite. It seems to be the nature of man. Now, I like the fact that somebody like J.D. Vance, who had no money, no success, or at least no success as a kid, he had a bunch of things stacked against him. His grandma was taking care of him. His mom was a drug addict. And why there's somebody else that the left would love, does love, Obama. He grew up poor, he struggled, and he became president. J.D. Vance became vice president. Hope he'll be a president soon. Obama, Barack Hussein Obama, he became president from nothing. The difference with this system is that there's the opportunity. Doesn't mean everybody can be president. It means that everybody, if they work, if they have discipline, they can generally have a pretty good life. And that doesn't happen in other places. We're going to go ahead and go to our first break. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. I want to say thank you to everybody that's on social media. I know it's been a few weeks since I've been on. I appreciate if you jump back in and you listen. The last show, it was really great how so many of my listeners decided to share. That really helps get this message out. So thank you. Let's go ahead and come back. Okay. Well, we'll be back in just a minute. There we go. Okay. Now things are rolling.
California is doing Doge, but better.
I know.
And this is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town. We've got a little treat for you. Sorry about the delay there. Gavin Newsom, he's always running his mouth. He's trying to be on both sides of an issue, and he talks about Doge. And I thought this little clip was just, it shows you the hypocrisy that runs rampant here in California. So let's go ahead and play that. Well, eventually we'll get there. This is
Newsom
new for us.
Says California is doing Doge, but better.
I know. We're Doge, but better. And we've been Doge, but better for literally 6 years.
Anyone else thinking that maybe Newsom doesn't know what Doge stands for? Newsom saying, we're Doge, but better, is like Southwest saying, we're Delta, but with more punches to the face.
Yeah.
The only thing Newsom has cut in California is the number of U-Hauls available for residents moving to Texas. I haven't seen someone this delusional about what they've accomplished since I watched Katy Perry talk about being an astronaut.
Please like, comment, and subscribe.
So yes, Gavin Newsom actually had the nerve to say, we do Doge, but better. This is the same man who spent $24 billion on the homeless problem. And I'm proud to announce the results he got was he got a 40% increase in homelessness in California. $24 billion, and he was able to get a 40% increase. We have more homeless than the rest of the country combined. Now, I saw a really great headline from my favorite source of fake news, the Babylon Bee. And they said they believed that Gavin Newsom had the type of ability that if we gave him another $24 billion, now that he's learned how to increase homelessness, he can double what we've currently got. And I think there's a real shot that if we keep electing incompetent, lying fools like Gavin Newsom, that it will happen. The definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and over again when it's not working. Well, California is just not working very well. So we need to do something different. Maybe we should look at what are the foundations of our freedom. Maybe we should become aware of what our freedoms are. Whether that's taking a class on the Constitution and learning that, well, you have these inalienable rights. Learning that you have freedom and opportunity. Learning that you could vote in a different way. I'm saying that somewhat sarcastically because I think most of my listeners realize you could vote in a different way. But California, we don't have a single statewide Republican. Let's face it, we got a two-party system. I get there's problems with the Republicans, but at least they're the party of common sense for the most part. The Democrats, they ignore self-evident truths. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's see. Men can become women. No, they can't. That's kind of a self-evident truth. But if you live in a place, if you're a woke leftist or a progressive, where it's your truth, and my producer over there, he's got a different truth than I do, and we don't have any truth in common, then you can define the world in any way you want. Now, that doesn't mean that your definition will have any semblance or relationship to reality. So getting back to the original founders, the church, the Christian church, defined morality. Well, I think that's an original principle that if we get back to, we will be a stronger country. The left loves to say diversity is our strength. Well, by its very nature, if you're diverse, yes, you do have a group of ideas, but you're not unified. So I don't know that it's our strength. I think that there are some good things about it, but it's just not that simple. And I want to point out from the 1920s through the 1960s, our country, one of the periods where our country was the strongest was from the 20s through the 60s. We were unified. Even the Democrats thought it was a good idea. We disagreed on policy, but they thought it was a good idea that you're patriotic. Now the Democrats don't think it's a good idea. They think you might even be a Nazi if you dare disagree with leftist policy. So that whole period of time, 20s through the 60s, immigration was severely tamped down. Yes, we did have a Bracero-type worker program, but it was severely tamped down. So we didn't have huge amounts of immigration in that period. Now, why would that be good? Well, what if you had a neighbor and they couldn't speak English? How do you have any unity with that neighbor? How do you find common ground if you can't speak the same language? By slowing things down, everybody, they moved into what we call that great melting pot. The California, it's no longer a melting pot. It's a boiling pot that's constantly bubbling up with problems. Now, how useful is that? I don't think it's useful at all. That doesn't mean that I think that, oh yeah, California has to all be white people. Let's face it, California is all Mexican people. There's more largely of Hispanic descent, or largely of Mexican descent, but not entirely. They outnumber the white people. I'm okay with that. I don't have a problem with that. But I want them to speak English. I want them to continue making the delicious tacos. I'm in. I can learn to eat Mexican food just fine. I appreciate they have some interesting twists to their culture, but largely they've kept some of their culture, but they've become Americans first. But when we have overwhelming numbers, what happens? Well, let's look at the Somalis and some of the Sudanese, but I think it's mostly Somalis. You know, Ilhan Omar's district in, is it Minnesota? So there we are, and you've got all these people that don't speak English, that they didn't have to become American. And the reason they didn't have to become American is because they moved all into the same place and became their own community. They weren't America first. America first is not, everybody gets caught up on America first. Well, that's what Trump says. So did Reagan. Did you know that? I've seen old campaign stuff. Reagan used America first. What about Nixon? I've seen Nixon stuff that says America first. I guarantee you that there are Democrats, if we were to really look, that used America first. The idea that we're supposed to take care of what's unique and special in this country first. I don't think that's a Trump idea. I think that's an intensely, an integral American idea. I might even go so far as to say, yes, we should be America first. And to me, that's just common sense. That's a self-evident truth. Yet so much of the progressive left thinks that, no, America's bad because we've done some bad things. Yep, we've done some bad things. Every single country, the more you learn about history, every single one has done some bad things, hasn't treated their people well. And yet, as horrible as the left makes this country out, none of them ever leave. I really think that I have people and friends with money. If some of them were willing to leave, I think we could raise some money and we could pay for their plane tickets. In addition, how many of them, I shouldn't say none of them will ever leave. Rosie O'Donnell left. She's one of the big exceptions. She's now being kicked out of Ireland, which is hilarious. Did you know that? She's been kicked out of Ireland. I don't know why. I saw the headline and didn't have a chance to read it. Nonetheless, hilarious. Ellen DeGeneres, she slipped off to England, but she has money. And now stuff has come into light that I want her to have her day in court. I don't want to accuse her of anything, but it doesn't look good. So we have a few exceptions, but largely nobody will leave. And the world is trying to sneak in. Everybody that's poor, or some people that aren't poor that simply they want more opportunity. They realized that during the Biden administration, it was easier to sneak in than do the right thing. It's also just bizarre to me how now that Trump has largely closed the border, lowest number of crossings that they've ever seen at the southern border and the northern border in the last couple of months. There's still a few people sneaking across, but not many. Now that bill that they said everybody had to have, and that's Biden couldn't do a thing, that would have allowed 5,000 people to sneak across the border before we'd even begin to do anything. In other words, 5,000 illegals a day. And the left is bringing that back up like, oh yeah, well, we could have fixed this problem through legislation. Except their fix wasn't a fix. It had this big gaping hole in it that allowed 5,000 people in a day that we didn't vet. We didn't see whether they were criminals. We didn't see whether they were going to come leech off the system, because I don't want people that will leech off the system. I want people that are going to contribute. Another crazy thing that California is doing. California, they thought it was only going to cost a couple billion. Instead, we're at least $9 billion in debt from Medicaid, over budget. And on the one hand, they're suing President Trump over some things, but they're also $9 billion with a B over budget on Medicaid because they're giving Medicaid to people that are here illegally. Now, I'm a tax-paying citizen. I don't see how it's okay to give that type of, I won't call that one exactly welfare, but government-supported health care to people that are not here legally. Another thing that's crazy in California, we have a high-speed rail. Well, we have a tiny portion of it. I think they've done, a tenth of a mile of track? Enough that if you're on a skateboard, you could really slide along that track for a long ways. But aside from that, it has no other use. Now, my understanding is that they're going to turn what they've got into like an amusement park or a national monument. And that will be California's Stonehenge in 50 years. But I don't actually think it's ever going to be a high-speed rail because we've got these crazy things called cars. And we already had Amtrak, which loses money in every place in the United States except for the D.C. area. That one about breaks even. Everywhere else, Amtrak runs at a loss. And then we got these crazy things that zip around in the air. Airplanes? So why do we need this high-speed rail? Look, if they could have done it cheaply and efficiently, that's one thing. They started off, and I think it was $8 billion was the number they were giving us. Now it's well over $100 billion. They said it was going to be done by 2025. We're there. Now they're saying maybe 2040. I just don't think it's going to happen. Why? Almost all of that happened during Gavin Newsom's better than Doge. So what's the reality? California, it's amazing that more California congressional people, in other words, Senate and House, didn't go to Venezuela to try to help the MS-13 gang member that had seen judges, had a deportation order, has a filing from his wife that he's a wife beater. Now, he hadn't seen his court yet, but she'd filed and was afraid of him, and now is talking about how he's a great guy. But I want to point out that when everything happened publicly, of course she has to say he's a great guy. You don't marry an MS-13 gang member and not toe the line to the gang, because you will disappear. And I'm sure since he's got kids, and they kept calling him a Maryland man rather than a gang member, a wife beater. The courts had already said, you're a gang member and you need to go. He's just a Maryland man. I wish they would spend as much time focusing on the victims of MS-13 as they do on protecting a criminally illegal alien. And they really don't want us to have protections like in California. It's really difficult to get an AR-15. Now, it's a pretty standard gun around almost the whole rest of the country. You can get them here, but you got to jump through quite a few hoops. Well, I had a thought. What if we were to rename it? Instead of it being the AR-15, what if we were to call it the MS-13? Then wouldn't the Democrats have to be all for it? Isn't that how that works? I don't know if it'll work, but it's worth a thought. So it's great that border crossings are low, but we've still got sanctuary cities, though Trump's taken that on. We've got some positives happening in the Trump administration. And so in the next segment, I want to kind of focus on some of those positives, because there's not nearly as many in California as I'd want, except for the Democrats keep picking the wrong side of issues, and I'm hopeful that maybe California can change. We just recently, in the 70 percentile, passed a make crime bill again. I can't remember the number on it. Anyway, it used to be that a criminal could, as if they were motivated, go steal $950 worth of stuff from a store, and it was only a misdemeanor ticket. And they could do that as many times a day. It wasn't cumulative, as they were motivated to do. So, I mean, if they did 20 times a day, that's almost $20,000. And it would only be a misdemeanor ticket. So the cops weren't bothering to show up in a lot of areas to even deal with it. And we largely fixed that problem. I'm not thrilled because there's not enough teeth in it, but it moved towards reason. Well, that passed as a ballot initiative at 70%. Let's go ahead and go to our last break. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXCX, the best talk in town. When we come back, we're going to play the second video. So let's go ahead and come back. Okay. All right. And this is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXCX, the best talk in town. For me, when I need a moment of inspiration, this is one of my go-to songs. Love Lee Greenwood. Love the fact that he basically eats, walks, and talks patriotism. That's something that I strive for. So I thought we'd just spend a little bit of time with that before we get into some of the positive things that are happening. And I find myself, after the saluting of our flag, I find myself saying amen. For me, that seems right. But for me, this is a country that was founded on Christian principles that, while there's enough freedom for people to not be Christians, it makes it special because of our inalienable rights, because they wrote a document to limit government. All the articles, all that first part of the Constitution are about limiting and telling government what it can do. Then we get to the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments. Those are about defining the rights of the people, not limiting them. Because then when we get to the 9th and 10th Amendment, there's a talk about both alienable and inalienable rights that are not defined, and anything that's not defined, it falls to the state or the people. That's pretty cool. And that doesn't exist anywhere else. There's democracies, but nobody else has actually picked up the unique specialness that we've got. Most constitutions look really good, but they're defined by government, and government can take away your rights rather than God granting your rights. That's essential. Now, I got kind of a feel-good story about Bernie Sanders because I love me some Bernie Sanders. Now, I'm thrilled that Bernie Sanders is a socialist. He's embraced the American dream. He's now a millionaire. He's got 3 mansions. What other country in the world could a devout socialist that always talks about the oligarchy and has been for 20 plus years could become a millionaire? That's pretty cool. Now, it also makes him a hypocrite, especially because the year he made the most money when he wrote a book, that year he made over $1 million. Just that year on that book. That was 2016. And, you know, when he talks about how, you know, the oligarchy is bad, but because of the generous heart that Bernie Sanders has, he gave less than 1% of his money to charity. So I'm sure that he gave a whole bunch of it to government, because that's how you spread the love of charity, right? Less than 1% in the year he made the most money in his entire life, as he now runs around on private jets with AOC screaming about the oligarchy. What a great country. You got to love where a socialist can become truly successful, live with a level of hypocrisy that is just almost unimaginable. And he has the right to do it. Now, if we were to enact the policies that he wants, he never would have made his money. Some other positives. With Trump in office, we've got a lot of the Gaza hostages returned. We've got China, who is not our friend. Don't kid yourselves, folks. They're in bad shape because they've got a real estate crisis. They've got a stock market crisis. They sell more to us than anybody else. So all that we're seeing is some of our prices will temporarily rise until other countries are stepping in and taking over the manufacturing. I hope a bunch of it happens here. We just did our first completed trade deal with the United Kingdom, major trading partner. Ukraine and Russia are now talking. It's not fixed, but all we had was open conflict during the Biden administration, and at least they're talking. Hope something happens there. For that matter, Israel and Hamas, they're somewhat talking, but frankly, until the last of the Hamas leadership is gone, I don't see there's any chance for peace, because all they do is call for the death of Israel. And I want to remind people that you can be a citizen of Israel. It's a pretty tolerant country, probably a little more left than the United States on average. You can be a citizen of the Israel, be a Palestinian, and be a Muslim, not a Jew, and be a full citizen with full rights. So really, they just want people to, I don't know, not try to kill them constantly. I don't know. They're just picky. They don't like people trying to kill them. So trade deals are coming together. The stock market has largely, not entirely rebounded, but we're not in the dip we were. As more trade deals come on deck, I think the stock market will continue to rebound. And that's just not one aspect of the stock market. The Dow is up. The S&P is up. The NASDAQ is up. The big, beautiful bill. That is the continuation of the Trump tax cut that he gave us. Now, it's going to include other things, but Congress is talking about that's probably going to be done in June. They've already handled the reconciliation, so they don't have to deal with the 60 votes in the Senate. So I think that's going to get done. Tax cuts matter. And the reason tax cuts matter is because it allows you to put more money in your pocket to go out and then live the American dream the way you feel you should. It's another little aspect of freedom where you get to define your own destiny. Not just your economic destiny, but define your own destiny. Where else can you be? Like I talked about, a socialist is a millionaire here. While I really don't like Bernie and don't respect him at all, I'm impressed. He makes more money than I do as a socialist on a government salary. So, folks, it's time to get involved. And I say this all the time. But I truly believe that a small number of people can make a huge difference. If you just went out and talked to your family, if you changed yourself, you became the change you wanted to see, then all of a sudden you wouldn't be a hypocrite. You could speak to your family and they'd realize, wow, not all of them, because let's face it, we all got crazy family, but there's a percentage of them where your influence and your steadiness, if you change who you are, whether that's becoming more aligned with Christ, something that I'm very much working on, or simply standing for traditional principles, the traditional American way of life, standing for common sense, speaking up. That's where it starts. There's where culture has begun to shift. When we look at a younger generation, now not the Gen X, but the ones right after, is that Z? I have to ask my producer because he's much, much younger than me. Gen X, they tend to be pretty darn liberal. But Gen Z, as we're looking at surveys, as we're looking at what's happening on college campuses, particularly the boys, they're much more conservative than anybody's been in generations. Maybe since before World War II. They've been doing a survey since about World War II about how conservative you are. Do you consider yourself very liberal, moderate, conservative, or very conservative? Well, the boys in record numbers are saying, no, I'm very conservative. I've had enough of this. And I think that's because the woke culture is essentially made it evil to have masculine characteristics and made it acceptable for them to take on female characteristics. And not only acceptable, but then to go compete with women in sports. There's another 80-20 issue where we know it's wrong, and yet the Democrats are on the wrong side. You don't want to be on the wrong side. This world was changed by our founding fathers. And about 6% or less, some people say 3%, were actively participating in the American Revolution. 6% of the people took on the largest military in this world, in England. And they won with God's providence. Folks, I thank you for this time. This is Eric Rollins, the Constitutionalist, here on 1550 KXEX, the best talk in town.